like me to suggest what you can do with that promotion?
Colonel Dax! You will apologize at once or I shall be placed under arrest.
I apologize for not being entirely honest with you. I apologize for not revealing my true feelings. I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
Since the publication of the book 25 years ago, no one dared to make this movie. It was too shocking, too frank.
What sort of casualties do you anticipate, sir?
Say 5% killed by our own barrage. It's a very generous allowance. 10% more in getting through no man's land, and 20% more getting through the wire. That leaves 65%, with the worst part of the job over. Let's say another 25% in actually taking the anthill. We're still left with a force more than adequate to hold it.
General, you're saying that more than half my men will be killed.
Aside from the inescapable fact that a good many of your men never left the trenches, there's the question of the troops' morale. Don't forget that.
The troops' morale, sir.
Certainly. These executions will be a perfect tonic for the entire division. There are few things more fundamentally encouraging and stimulating than seeing someone else die.
Where in heaven's name are they?
On the left.
Where on the west? 0+1 and they're still in the trenches. They're not advancing. Miserable cowards. They're not advancing. The barrage is getting away from them. They're still in the trenches. Yes. Captain Nichols.
Yes, sir?
Order the 75s to commence firing on our own positions.
Welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. Tonight we're going to be talking about Paths of Glory, our first Stanley Kubrick movie that we've discussed on this podcast thus far. After we did a pretty big Kubrick run on GTA, which was, we did Clockwork Orange, Shining, Doctor Strangelove. I feel like I'm missing at least one of them.
Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, we did Full Metal Jacket too. So, our Kubrick library so far has been pretty stacked, at least, cross shows. I think this, this might be my favorite Kubrick movie that we've watched besides Doctor Strangelove, or that I've watched.
Not Clockwork Orange.
I like Clockwork Orange, but
I don't know. I mean, like when I saw Clockwork Orange, I'll totally, be honest. Like that movie spoke to me in weird ways that I didn't know I could be spoken to about, and I was just so enamored of it. But that's mostly because that was probably his most visual, experimenting with using well, I mean, you could also say 2001 is, but using storytelling techniques visually in very unique ways.
So take it on acid or watch it on acid, right? That's what I got from that. I've never seen Clockwork Orange, so I'm thinking about.
You should definitely not watch that movie on acid.
No.
Okay. No. Oh, okay. Cool.
No,
that will psychologically damage you.
Yeah.
Unless your parents, of course, hand you $100,000 and then take whatever.
I don't want to live with resentment towards my parents for giving me $100,000. That sounds awful.
And to discover it during an acid trip. My God.
Well, Clockwork Orange, I always find is nostalgic for me because it reminds me of my childhood. Because that's what England looks like. I mean, obviously it's a bit fancied up, but the urban hellscape that reminds me of home.
There's something quintessentially British about the messaging of the evils of liberalism that comes at the end of that, with the guy trying to basically overthrow the government by making his resentment towards Alex, making him insane enough to jump out of that window. I don't know. I feel like the liberal conservative dichotomy in that movie is pretty fantastic.
Like the only Kubrick movie I've seen so far is Full Metal Jacket, and
this one.
This one too.
Unless you didn't actually watch it and you're showing up and you're just gonna go along with whatever everyone else does.
Yeah, I've watched it, to be honest, but yeah, this is the second Kubrick movie I've seen since Full Metal Jacket. And like a quick word for that movie, I mean, for a Vietnam movie, all I can say is like, wow, impressive in a way.
Yeah, for anti-war, like if you're looking at good like anti-war Vietnam movies, there's 3 of them: Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, and Platoon are all really good ones.
All their stuff.
And then I remember when Forrest approached me to come on, it was like anti-war movie. I was like, oh, I went to those 3, but I hadn't seen Paths of Glory, which is wild to me because All Quiet on the Western Front was my favorite book growing up. So World War I history. My dad was a history guy, so with that book, I read it like over and over again while everyone else was reading Harry Potter. And so not seeing Paths of Glory as a kid, and maybe I did. My dad took me to 2001: A Space Odyssey in the theaters when it like made a repeat in theaters for like a week. It's fucking wild. I was like 14 when I saw it, but yeah, Paths of Glory. This movie, for being 1958, is so. I mean, it's based on a true story, right? But like how Kubrick did it, and still we haven't learned a fucking thing in society and the way we run things. Because if you look over and over again, and we'll talk about it today, but I have a lot to say about this film as far as what it portrays and how we just tend to never listen.
Yeah.
Ever.
And I think that World War I is kind of the perfect war to make these points, because obviously, you know, like they could have made it about Korea, or, I mean, World War II, obviously we're kind of still living in like almost like the glory of it, like our position being the correct position that kind of led to U.S. hegemony, like, like dominating the rest of the world, really. But
That's how history ended.
Yeah, World War I isn't really that well taught, because I feel like in a lot of cases, because there weren't Nazis, you know what I mean? Like that we were fighting, like we were fighting, like it just kind of was like a clusterfuck. So making that movie at a time when like modern war techniques were being used for the first time, like, you know what I mean? Like machine guns and like, just all of these different strategies to try to, to try to make war a lot more brutal. But at the same time, there wasn't the distance that like we kind of have from it now, or and there wasn't the like chaos of Vietnam, like the way that, that like we were surprised by the fucking guerrilla fighting techniques. Like it was really, it's the perfect like hand-to-hand close combat war to make these points in, I feel like.
There was the first introduction of machine guns. It was the first introduction of tanks. You had planes now, and all these things culminated into, easily one of the bloodiest wars in world history, probably the bloodiest, with the trench warfare bayonet. There's a whole dialogue in this film about you would rather die from a bayonet or a machine gun, and he was like, well, machine gun, but either way, it's just metal piercing you.
Yeah, that's one of the most like poignant scenes in the movie, I think. They say, the truth is nobody wants to get injured. Like, if you really were afraid of dying, you'd be living in fear of dying for the rest of your life. But like being afraid of getting injured, because, and you can see what even the flimsy helmets they're kind of wearing the entire time. Like, they kind of protect your head, but it doesn't protect you against shell shock, and it doesn't protect you against injuries to the rest of your body. And, in this war in particular, like they're running around with fucking machine guns and bayonets, like the chance of your body just getting like ripped up by something, even if you survive. I know, I think my great grandfather served in World War I and like got mustard gassed, and was like, and had to like live with that for the rest of his life, and it caused him like severe health problems or maybe it was my great grandfather, I don't know, but that was like something that like it was horrifying. I think once people kind of knew about it after the fact and saw the aftermath of it. But I wanted to throw to Djene first and get some background on how they ended up in the stalemate that this movie is based around in 1914, 1915, that kind of, there was like a couple years of no side really advancing past the points that they kind of captured.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously we can go into this topic as deep as you want, but, I'll give the kind of cliff notes, I guess, on this. But yeah, so when we think of the First World War, it's important to remember this, the image that comes to our mind is the conflict that took place on the Western Front. And of course, it's always important to, make a note that that was not the only theater of war, and not the only significant theater of war. You had like major wars of maneuver taking place in Eastern Europe, in Russia, in the Middle East. You had the naval war. You had you had conflicts in Africa, and so on and so forth. But the image, obviously, that sticks into our mind is this Western Front, which was a very critical part of the war. And what happened basically was that you had Germany acting according to its war planning, seeking to strike and knock out France very quickly from the war, in a similar way to the way that they'd done in 1871 during the Franco-Prussian War. And so they sort of launched this rapid offensive and pushed very deep into France. And in fact, it mentions this in the kind of prologue to the movie, that there is the miracle at Man, where the French and their British allies stopped the German offensive just outside Paris and pushed them back. And very quickly, as we head towards the winter of 1914, after the outbreak of the war, in the summer of 1914, this war of maneuver on the Western Front comes to an end. You've had all these technological changes, and there are some sort of precursors to this type of warfare in the Japanese-Russian War and in the Balkan Wars. But, armies weren't really used to all this new industrial technology. And very soon it became bogged down with, machine guns, being able to halt infantry and cavalry. And we end up with the two armies digging in and creating a trench system, which basically lasts until the final sort of phase of the war in 1917, 1918, when again we return to the war of maneuver. But you're basically dealing with like militaries in Europe going through transformations as they kind of still have the sort of organizational structures and military doctrines of the 19th century, but they have the technology of the 20th century. And as you might imagine, those kind of military doctrines of the 19th century, placed in the context of military technology of the 20th century, led to utter bloodshed and barbarism. And, this is shown, this happened to the British Army, and this also happened to the French Army. And, this novel, I believe, is based, the novel which the movie is based on a real case where troops refused to take orders in 1915 to assault a German fortified position. And there were perennial problems in the French and British military. In 1917, in fact, there was a mass mutiny in the French military over the kind of senseless violence that took place. These like meaningless offensives where rank upon rank of infantry were sort of driven across no man's land for very little gain. And you had a kind of officer corps that was still trying to play by the 19th century rules. And it wasn't until the end of the war, really, that we recognize that the armies had got used to this new technological context in which war was taking place, and they were able to return to a kind of war of maneuver. But for this, 3-4 years in the middle of the war, you have this bloody, senseless violence in which, people were sent to their deaths. And of course, then this is hinted to in the movie, people suffer major psychological breakdowns. The British and the French military would execute people for having psychological breakdowns. The officer, the general in the movie says there's no such thing as shell shock. In the British military, there was a big sort of case a few decades ago was, people coming to terms with the fact that the British Army had been executing people who had shell shock from, or what we would call PTSD today. So
you still kind of in some ways see that a similar thing happening right now with CTE in like football and stuff. Like sports not really wanting to admit in a similar way that the injuries that people get are traumatic brain injuries.
So yeah, basically to sum up, this movie is taking place at a kind of stalemate on the Western Front, where we have this huge carnage and bloodshed and growing discontent within the rank and file of the military about the way that the war is being prosecuted and the way that the generals and the upper leadership of the military were seemingly throwing the lives of soldiers away for purely propaganda or political purposes rather than even having any real military utility.
And that kind of perfectly brings us to the plot of this movie, because, you know, I think one of the major themes in this movie really is just who gets the blame, right? Like who gets the blame for the stalemate, who gets the blame for outdated war techniques. And, you know, you have generals sitting, Meru and Brulard. You know, Brulard obviously is the top general who's directly in contact with the French government, and who more than anyone else gets gets raked through the press and by politicians. But then, you know, like right underneath him, you have General Meru. And, you know, as the pressures of French society get, you know, like worse on them to somehow advance this cause that they're really not prepared to advance, you know, they start like demanding these missions or these goals that are unachievable. Like, you know, literally taking the anthill, which is something that they've been trying to do in this movie for months and haven't been able to do. But, like, you know, now they demand it by Friday. Like, so as that kind of thing happens, and the goals are really unachievable or like impossible for any military, let alone one that's unprepared for this style of warfare, the blame just keeps getting passed down further and further until really, you know, the court martial is a spectacle. Like they're trying to show like, oh, well, you know, it's not that we are having issues, it's that these soldiers have extreme amounts of cowardice and it's their fault. So it's kind of a game to see how far down they can push that blame.
Yeah, I think you saw a lot of that during the Bush administration too. Whenever we first went into Afghanistan and Iraq, and there were, you know, failure after failure. You know, you don't fight with the army you want; you fight with the army that you have. You know, R.I.P. King. No, but you know, like you can actually see like there's a continuation of that, because, like, you know, Vietnam was also a kind of a failure in strategy, which that, you know, obviously has not happened yet in their timeline, you know, when this movie was made. But, like, you know, Vietnam was trying to move away from the whole concept of trench warfare with the infantry being helicopters.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, really a big version of this is like the My Lai massacre. And, you know, like, oh, it's individual soldiers and individual, you know, units that have gone insane and started massacring people. And it's not the army, you know, the U.S. military, like, having an impossible goal in a war where they're just hyping people up to, like, absolutely murder people. Like, it can't be that. It has to be like these individual psychopathic soldiers have just, you know, gone out of their minds.
So this is where you know, the war is a racket. Left flank vets, this is all we talk about. Not all we talk about. We talk about a lot. But also, this shit is like when the general's walking around, General Moreau's walking around the trenches, and you said it, that he was talking about shell shock. That shit's real. Like when a general's saying shell shock's not real, they treat PTSD in the military and trauma the exact same way in 2021 that they did in 1950 or 1915, right? This is a thing. There's a culture built within the military to prevent you from reporting things or talk about your things that are going on in your mind. And if you do, you're a coward, you're a pussy. You know, you're belittled because the people around you have the idea that you can't. You know, you just got to suck it up. You know, we still have that problem in the U.S. military when it comes to like blame. You know, we're talking about like the general, right? This shit happens all the time. My Lai is a great example. I thought about that when I was watching this. I'm like, one person went down for My Lai. Yeah. And that's it.
And even that one person kind of tried to pass the blame elsewhere during those hearings. And, you know, they weren't having it because the military bureaucracy is so fixed that they're like, no, like, someone's got to go down, and it's going to be the lowest person we can find, like the lowest ranking.
I mean, Highway of Death in 1991, fucking the things, Fallujah, what happened in Fallujah using uranium rounds, and you know, the lasting effect. So yeah, and something like my partner and I talk about these movies, and like I wish we talked about the people who had been suffering because of this war around it, not necessarily humanizing the soldiers, but humanizing the people who happen to be stuck in these situations. But with Paths of Glory, it does a really good job of just like sticking to the point and, like, you know, getting through the trial and talking about this. But, you know, and I think of like Wells Fargo. Who did they blame for their $9 billion fine that they had to pay for the government? They blamed the frontline workers. They blamed the tellers. They didn't, and the local low-level managers. They don't blame the people at the top. Never. And we have this problem still where people at the top making the decisions for war, right? War's a racket. We're fighting oil wars and poppy wars and whatever else you want to do in South America, lithium wars, water wars, soon coming to a country near you. It's something that we're going to be watching, and it's never going to change, right?
And
unless
the
we
Chobani
change
Wars that Kamala Harris is going to bring to the Northern Triangle. I'm not looking forward to that.
No.
I really appreciate the point you were making that one of the problems with the anti-war movies even is that they focus on the soldiers rather than the people who are the victims of the soldiers. But I still think this movie is a good movie, and I think it feels very modern in the sense that it talks about the military bureaucracy, and the military bureaucracy that exists today is far greater than existed in the First World War. It is a huge apparatus, especially in the United States, and coupled with what we see in the movie is there's not real accountability within the bureaucracy, and when someone high-ranking is held accountable, it is viewed purely within a bureaucratic and political maneuvering amongst the upper echelons of the military bureaucracy, rather than any principled stand. And I think this feels very modern because we have this problem, particularly in the United States, where it is coupled with a culture of elite impunity, which there's elite impunity in all major developed countries, but in the United States it is a particularly pernicious thing where if you are at the top of an organization, you can basically get away with everything. But if you're low down in society, once you get to a certain level, you get the full weight of the administration thrown at you, at the justice system thrown at you, as you mentioned, Wells Fargo and things like that. And this movie feels relevant because what we're seeing is people on the front line, soldiers on the literal front line, who followed orders or did nothing unreasonable, being blamed for major problems taking place, because of military policy, because of the political nature of the military. In the United States, there's this notion that the American military is apolitical, which is the American military has a strong sort of tradition of non-direct intervention into civilian government, but that doesn't mean it's apolitical. Means it works within a different. It's not the Egyptian military for sure, but that doesn't mean that there isn't politics going on. And and it feels very relevant because you look at a place like Afghanistan, which is basically Afghanistan was the anthill for the United States, where Americans were told you've got to build a nation. And there was no way that was a realistic task, even within the kind of framework of like American policymaking. Even if we take them on their word that they want to bring democracy, it was a completely unreasonable goal driven by political considerations, which is the kind of reason that the anthill is assaulted, or it's implied that's the reason the anthill is being assaulted, is because of these political considerations that the general staff are taking into account. And one final point, because I'm going on a lot, is I think one thing that movie gets across is the futility. And I would actually say that many of these were, another reason this movie seems quite meaningful today is because many of these wars are not even resource wars, right? Afghanistan was not a resource war. Even Iraq was not really a resource war in the way that people think it was. It was a way for the military bureaucracy to kick open the U.S. treasury, because all these oil contracts in Iraq are going to non-American companies. Or if you go to Afghanistan, there's no meaningful so it's kind of even more perverse because these wars are completely futile their only purpose is for the military establishment to sustain itself and keep itself relevant. And the anthill seems to be kind of like the model for that, because at least, if they're looting a country's resources, at least it makes sense. But this doesn't even make sense from any sort of national perspective, even a kind of dog-eat-dog one. It's purely the military apparatus seeking to just, suck in and expropriate more resources from its own people, and the people being killed are the collateral damage of that attempt to loot the American public and the American treasury.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that this movie takes place in the context of the French military, but then they make sure that the people, all of the actors keep their American and British accents. Like, it's clearly not about the French military. It's clearly.
I just love that one French accent that guy had. Really good.
It's clearly a movie, being filmed during the Cold War, where you couldn't really make an anti-Cold War movie, but because it's the French military that they're kind of making this into an allegory about, although everyone doesn't really seem that French despite their names, I think that it does a good job. It does a good job bringing home that message without without directly indicting the Cold War administration, which I think was the purpose of it. But also, I think it's one really interesting part is, and this really goes into a French, I think a French European tradition of, the French goal of liberty. The Colonel Dax, the character played by Kirk Douglas, is almost like an Atticus Finch character. He's a lawyer that really does believe in law and men and really does believe in his own men and wants to make sure that they're safe and really believes in law and wants there to be a fair trial and really believes in those ideals. And the military establishment is completely unable to even process that would be a thing. In the end, when he's offered General Moreau's job, the general's well, I did everything you asked. I prosecuted the person that you wanted me to prosecute. I made sure that this was handled well. I let you be the lawyer on it. What have I done wrong? And this idealistic vision of French values and the values of liberty and equality and in this military context are just non-existent. But there is it is an idealistic ballad to those views. Anyway, what's up, Varn?
Nothing much. I was thinking about that point. Do you think that is why it was so influential on someone like David Simon? It's also interesting because of Kubrick's pictures. This is one of the few movies that has a truly uncynical character. Mm-hmm. Where if you look at his later movies, there are no uncynical characters.
And there's a cynical reason for that, I think, which is that Kirk Douglas produced the movie.
Yeah.
It was going to be a lot more, I think, Kubrick-esque, I'll call it. And Kirk Douglas was no, I want to make a liberal 50s social picture where social issues are brought to the front, and really fought tooth and nail against Kubrick for that to happen, which is an interesting.
Considering that Kubrick was more libertarian and Douglas is just big Hollywood liberal.
Well, I think Kubrick was just more cynical. All of his. I don't think that there's even necessarily a political ideology behind it. It's just he thinks war is stupid and he wants to turn it into a farce in all of these movies. Mm-hmm. And I think that he thinks bureaucracy is stupid. He thinks the establishment is always going to be corrupt, and he's making those points throughout all of his work. And I just think that Kirk Douglas wanted to handle it more seriously instead of being satirical about it.
I think if you were to compare this to other Kubrick movies, there's two comparisons that are both illuminating. One is Barry Lyndon, because it deals with the class dynamic, the officer versus non-officer class, and its parallels to other classes in society explicitly. But in that movie, there's no Michael Douglas figure. I mean, Kirk Douglas figure. It's pure cynicism, and where his libertarianism may shine out a little bit is that while Kubrick does kind of favor the little guy slightly more than the big guy. The last scene of the film is also damning to them too, because the last scene of the film is an act of very subtle cruelty.
Well, I think too the last scene is very much like that David Simon thing you brought up, because and sorry for our viewers who haven't seen The Wire. I'm going to spoil the fuck out of the ending, but the end of this movie kind of showed you how like people, like society creates roles for us to fill, and certain ways, like nature abhors a vacuum, which is why animals have like similar evolutions, even though they're like not related at all throughout geology or whatever. But you also have a bit of that with The Wire, and I think to a lesser degree this movie, where people have different voids to kind of fill in, where Omar gets killed, and that kid that we followed through high school becomes the new Omar at the end of The Wire.
Yeah.
Or McNulty gets kicked out of the police force, but this other guy who was not cynical and jaded like McNulty ends up becoming cynical and jaded like McNulty, and basically kind of becomes the new McNulty. And they're not the same character, but they kind of fill that kind of void that was once left. And you kind of get a certain sense of that, like, these people are kind of, the filling that void as like the leadership changes, and whatnot. But to a lesser degree, I was kind of thinking a bit about that, although I did not read the article that was sent out. So
I have David Simon talking about it in his own words, how this movie inspired him. So this would be probably a good time to play that.
These institutions exist because we need them, because they approximate human goals that we have to have. Certain labors have to get done in our society. It's how they exist and on what terms and what individual recourse there is that determines whether or not you're living in a republic or a tyranny, or whether or not there's regard for human rights or not. It's stuck in my mind that wherever you go, there you are. If you took what Kubrick had accomplished and what Humphrey Cobb was writing about in the novel, and you applied it across society almost at any given point where there's a large institution and it's being run without oversight or without sufficient oversight, this is what you get. This is what you get. You usually get an institution that is self-preserving and self-sustaining, where the people at higher ranks maneuver for a greater reward than the people lower in the pyramid. And what you clearly see from the first scene, when French generals played by Adolphe Menjou and George Macready, brilliantly played, maneuvering through personal ambition, right past the most basic concern about whether or not they're trading lives for actual value.
George, I'm responsible for the lives of 8,000 men. What is my ambition against that?
By the time that scene concludes, it's clear that Macready's general is willing to trade on the lives of all of his men for even the possibility of a promotion. And it's clear that Menjou's chief of staff knows this when he's making the offer.
The life of one of those soldiers means more to me than all the stars and decorations and honors in France.
So, you think this attack is absolutely beyond the ability of your men at this time?
I didn't say that, George.
Of course, this was based on a true story, the Corporals of Souain, in 1916, in which the French army executed 4 corporals as an example to the others, in the same way that the Romans decimated legions when they failed to accomplish an objective. Humphrey Cobb was determined to rip the heroism out of war. He was, I think, in that way, much more aggressive and much more clear-eyed about what his mission was when he was writing, what he truly believed was an anti-war novel. He thought every time you set out to make an anti-war film, it ends up being a war film. And I'm not sure he's wrong. I mean, there's very few films that actually manage to stay within the pocket of souring you on war. The suffering is so heroic. The characters are so vibrant. And let's face it, when you're living life at the end of a spear, everything matters so intensely. It's so dramatic. All the Marines I knew from doing Generation Kill, they all love to do the dialogue from Full Metal Jacket. There's something about the camaraderie of war that undercuts every anti-war message. And Not this film.
Get these men out of here!
Not Paths of Glory, and maybe because it's not strictly an anti-war film, it's an anti-authority film. This is really a movie about chain of command. And there's a chain of command in civilian life, and there's a chain of command in every institution. There's a chain of command in politics. I don't think you get much by looking at the top. You know, if you follow a president, you get aspects that are presidential. If you follow a king, you get royalty. In this case, you have a colonel who is middle management.
Gentlemen of the court, there are times when I'm ashamed to be a member of the human race, and this is one such occasion.
With middle management as your point of view, you can look up and you can look down. And therein lies a political crux that, you know, he's able to tell a story about how power routes itself all the way down from the top to the individual.
The case made against these men is a mockery of all human justice. Gentlemen of the court, to find these men guilty will be a crime to haunt each of you to the day you die.
With everything I've done, my heart is really with either middle management or labor. But I'm always attending to how power routes itself through systems. And so I took that to heart. I was trying to structure a television show on HBO called The Wire. I remember rewatching it, you know, with a notepad in front of me and saying, you know, how did he do this? And, you know, what are the elements here that I'm trying to capture?
And I think that The Wire has a lot of similarities to this movie because, you know, it follows these bureaucracies that are sprawling and that really, you know, are just self-replicating. Like, I don't think that there's really any place for, you know, reforming minds in these bureaucracies, at least not in the middle management sense. Like, nothing Colonel Dax does throughout the entire movie. And David Simon says this later. It's just like a long interview that he did for Criterion Channel, so I didn't want to play all of it. But he says, like, you know, nothing Colonel Dax does actually really succeeds throughout the movie. Like, the only thing he actually succeeds in is, you know, I mean, obviously possibly promoting himself, but like the only thing he really succeeds in that's like one of his goals is giving them an extra 5 minutes to listen to the German singer at the end. Like he has
Which is Kubrick's wife.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's where I actually had that issue with it, right? In that sense of it's a very good movie from 1958. It represents a very important time. And on top of that, the story that it was based off, like 2 hours, I think I read after the execution, the high command said, came down and said, hey, we're actually going to just do a labor camp, but they had already killed him. So it's kind of like, that's really shitty. But it, you know, I wish more of that was conveyed. And I kind of wish Colonel Dax walked out or like been imprisoned or been arrested. So that way he like, you know, stood up. I mean, Dax from the very beginning puts down nationalism, like France is depending on you. Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel is probably my favorite quote from the movie is that. Because I mean, it's true. That's how we use it. You know, your country needs you. Fight for Germany, fight for the fatherland, you know, in All Quiet on the Western Front. These kids are high school kids. They're told by their teacher they need to join the war and fight for the fatherland kind of thing. And so we see that and it's portrayed, but Dax still stays in. And this is where the bureaucracy of the system comes in, right? This is where there's no mutiny of the people at the top who are fighting that general. General was never held accountable. 3 people have just been killed, like because they had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and the little bit of accountability for, you know, the second in command general, I think Meru is his name, is you know, it's incidental accountability. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so at the end of it, like he's probably going to get a hearing, and he's not going to be executed. Like, I doubt that. He's probably going to be out of Army command, but that's incidental. Like, if that hadn't been brought to, you know, anyone's attention, and if kind of Colonel Dax wasn't, you know, if Colonel Dax wasn't, you know, kind of blackmailing the top general, like nobody would have given a fuck that he opened on his own positions and like.
And about how systems replicate, you could see that with the lieutenant who led Meeker and the other guy into No Man's Land for the spy. You know, as a fuel mission failed, lied about it, killed a guy, and
he was the coward. He was the person who actually, you know, everybody was accused of cowardice and then pushed down the blame. He was kind of the one character that literally was a coward when he killed his own person.
It is interesting that the punishment for that is just the minor accountability of having to be part of the people doing the execution and thus having to live with the actual guilt of what you did, and thus having to feel it. But that's all they can really do is just directly implicate to himself in a way that no one other than Dax and he will know that he had to kill an innocent man, and he has to look at it for what it is as opposed to deflect it. And that's a pretty serious punishment for him in some ways, but it's also nothing. Like, because if he'd actually 100%. Been a sociopath, it wouldn't have done anything. Like,
and it's interesting that that's all Colonel Dax can really do. Like, you know what I mean? Like losing a battle or not gaining ground is something that needs to be severely punished. Literally killing someone in your own, like in your own group, I guess, that you went out on a scouting mission with, doesn't have a punishment in the same way.
I think it does a very good job too with the officer enlisted difference. After they get back from that night raid, and the lieutenants, the corporals, like, you killed that guy. You killed him, and then it's like, oh, it's now a lieutenant's word versus a private. Never gonna happen, right? On my ship in the Navy, the XO, who's second in command, was sleeping with a junior enlisted sailor. That's it's fraternization. It's all bad things you're not supposed to do. The XO ended up getting flown off the ship and got a shore duty and played golf for the rest of his career. Was able to retire just fine. The E5 busted down. 45 days restricted duty, not allowed to leave the ship. Awards taken away. Your career is pretty much over at that point. And this shows that very well. Of this is what happens. No officers are ever going to be held accountable. It's always going to be an enlisted. Look at Eddie Gallagher, officer. Clint Lawrence, officer. They were the ones who ordered war crimes, and they tried to take them down through the U.S. military bureaucracy, which fucking sucks. It doesn't hold people accountable. It may be bigger, but it's not much better than it was in the early 1900s, because people like Eddie Gallagher are still walking the streets of San Diego after he brutally murdered a 13-year-old kid. And it's like,
I think because they use the French army rather than the U.S. army to tell this story. The general can literally say, "Oh, we're not going to get officers involved in this. Like, this is a matter that's going to be settled by literally sacrificing soldiers' lives."
I actually think I know that's part of the book. It's also part of the historical instance, but it's also one of the few places where I accuse this movie of minor cowardice, because in the case, if you know the historical context, in the case of the French and British military, you're also dealing with, not as much in the case of the French military, but there's still the vestiges of semi-feudal class relations that are directly tied into military ranks, and in fact based off of it. And one of the things I found interesting, and this happened a lot during World War I, we talk about in the context of Vietnam, but was that a lot of the officer relations, like when, say, the Russians would massacre their officer corps, which they did quite a lot in 1916, 1917, they were also getting back at people who came from a stratified social class. In the case of France, it's a little weird, because France has had a revolutionary Republican tradition that has theoretically gotten rid of the hierarchical social class, but it also had been reestablished 3 different times in the prior century. So it's still vestigially there. In the case of the United States, where this becomes much more open, right, is that the officer class, despite our Republican heritage and having no vestigial nobility tied into our officer corps in the same way, we are still structured in the exact same way as the other militaries. It is not any more egalitarian whatsoever. And the officer distinction is still there. And it's in some ways even more arbitrary. I mean, because it's not family. It's just like, oh, well, you happen to have the right degree to come in as a CO. I mean, I've not been military, but I used to teach at military academies. I've worked with the military a lot of my life, and a lot of my family's been in the military. And I know that officer enlisted distinction is huge, but it's also effectively arbitrary in a way that it kind of gets to with the corporal, when they talk about like the corporal and the colonel, I think, all coming from the same school. Did they have the same educational background? I think it is implied that one of them has a slightly higher degree than the other, and that is why they came in. And it's just kind of just an arbitrary decision, but that decision automatically makes a massive distinction between those two people, even though they effectively even have the same background.
Yeah.
And if
so
it was,
I think that's why it's included.
If it was Mike Hammer that was, instead of just Ralph Meeker playing that role, he would have been like, tell your lieutenant to shut up.
Ask him who he is, Horace.
Tell her to shut up.
Shut up.
Fatality.
See, I have a hard time seeing Ralph Meeker as anybody but Mike Hammer after that first episode.
Oh, but he was so good in both movies too.
Yeah,
he's
a good actor.
I was actually surprised like how good he was in this movie. After because Kiss Me Deadly was not a great film as far as like the actual execution of it, but like it works in a very visceral level. This is a work of art. And Ralph Meeker, was able to sit there and raise his game, and did not tell his lieutenant to shut up, or have the colonel tell his lieutenant.
I think Engels makes a point about armies being a kind of reflection of the class relations that exist within a society, just in a more intense form. So I think obviously in Republican France. And, in Britain and Russia, obviously you had aristocracy playing an important role in the military. And even today in Britain, you still have kind of the remnants of a certain aristocratic caste. But you also have people who are career military, whose papas was a military and things like that. I think that certainly exists in the United States as well. There's a whole load of military families who come from officers and officers, like their granddad was an officer, their dad was an officer. You also have, for example, the provincial Midwestern bourgeoisie, the kind of guys who like to dress in camo, but they own like all the petrol station franchises in Pig Tickle, Wyoming. Those kind of guys will send their kids will join the National Guard as like little butterball officers who are like using it to go on about how they're veterans. I know so many people who are officers, but what were they doing? You have like people who are in the National Guard who like they go to ROTC at provincial universities, go into the go into the National Guard, and then boss around people who have been in the warfare. Then you have all these people coming out of aristocratic kind of institutions like West Point and stuff like that who are like they're the equivalent of the Harvard grads of
the Pete Buttigieg's of the world.
The Pete Buttigieg's of the world. You have a bunch of people who go on about their military service when their entire job was being a buddy fucker and working as a jag.
No, it's true. And yeah, as like someone who's just been in, right? Like you see that, right? And I think Kubrick, and kind of just taking it back to the movie and how I watched it. I'm not a movie buff. I love this shit. I love movies. Like I couldn't tell you anything about like lighting or any of that shit though. I'm just like, this is a good movie. I really enjoyed it.
I feel like that's the aesthetic we're going for with this show in general.
I love it. No, but with this movie, like it said France, right? Like we all know this is the French army versus the German front, but in the Western front. But also, even in the film, I felt like because they didn't try hard to do the accents, they didn't try hard to like, other than a few French names, they were pretty, trying to make it universal. That's how I felt Kubrick's doing it. Because even in the court scene, he did say the code of military justice, not which we do have. We have the uniform code at UCMJ in the U.S. military. So when he said that, they could have said the French uniform code of military justice, but he said the code of justice, right? And so when I heard that, I was like, this is universal to me.
I'd go farther than that. I would say that he's indicting the U.S. military at a time when I don't think you can indict the U.S. military. So instead, he's going after the French military in a war that we hadn't entered yet. And I think that's why very purposely they didn't hire French. The only person that has the accent that they should have in the entire movie is Kubrick's. Like, they got married during the filming of this movie, but Kubrick's wife is German and has a German, accent when she's singing in German. That's the only time you actually see the person's, the character's indigenous accent.
I would actually go. This is in the aftermath of the Korean War, which people forget was a pretty unpopular war and cost the Democratic Party the presidency. So war is still, I think, on the mind, and the Korean War, like I said, was not popular and people didn't like it. And so this is definitely, we Korea is often overshadowed by like the specter of Vietnam. But I think, we really have to understand the context of the Korean War in which this movie is being made.
It's also overshadowed in the specter of the myths of boomer and anti-war activism, because to be frank, even the Vietnam War was more supported by younger people than older people at the time, because the older people remembered the Korean War. And this is a fact that has been washed out in boomer mythology. Like, I could show you the statistics. It was recorded at the time. You wouldn't know that from the way we replay all the anti-Vietnam stuff. We tend to pretend this historical narrative about the New Left, basically, and the New Left was a very, very small fraction of that generation. But I think the other thing we have to put this in contextualize of, not only is this right after the Korean War, Eisenhower's still president. You have a general as the president, and while he can say certain things about the military-industrial complex, you can't.
Fatality.
This is also code. If you go back and read code pictures, if this had been said in the United States, it would have violated code.
Yeah, and the code was still going on for 3 years. Because this is 1957, the code kind of slowly got taken away starting in 1960. So this is still at a time when the code was loosening, but it's not by any means gone.
The other thing I would say that indicates that this is an indictment of the U.S. military, it's not just that people are speaking with their natural accents. If you really listen, the working class French people have working class American accents that are regionally variant. The middle class French people have middle class American accents that are standard Hollywood fare, and the upper class have upper class British or American accents.
Well, the upper class kind of has the mid Atlantic affectation.
Right.
That the upper class took on during this time period, at least in media, where it's like halfway between an American and a British accent, which
everybody talks like Nathan Robinson.
Yeah, which is, but that's not even an authentically real accent. Like,
it was invented for media.
You had to go to like a certain kind of school to be taught to speak like
the same with the British accent, though. Like this is the heyday of British received pronunciation when nobody spoke like that really anyway. So, this is an era in which people have like funny accents on media for technological reasons as well, to like make sure that they're clear and concise. Because one thing that always strikes me about one thing that struck me watching this, and there is a certain quality to movies made in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where, people are people don't mumble as much as they do now. And the dialogue is on one hand, very a little bit stilted, but on the other hand, it's quite powerful because it's very set piece in it rather than being natural. And I thought the use of accents as a way to signify class divisions is, we see this in everything, right? You watch Game of Thrones, and everybody in the Lannisters speaks with the upper class British accent, and everybody in the North speaks like someone from Yorkshire, right? So this is a tried and true way of signaling class, because it'd be a bit weird if that all the everybody in the trenches spoke like Shakespearean actors, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting. Watch other 50s movies and see how rare it is for you to get a lot of non-caricaturized lower and middle class accents. Like, you get it, but it's characterized. Even a movie like On the Waterfront, which is about that. All right. If you listen to it, all the lower class accents are exaggerated, and they're not in this movie, but they're there. So this movie's interesting to me from a technical perspective, to go a little bit technical on us, is because Kubrick is presaging a lot of stuff that's going to come later as common movie stuff. But there's still parts where this movie very much, like the ending scene is what, which is both an act of kindness and an act of cruelty simultaneously, right? Like, if you think about the meaning of that. But it's also a very 50s feeling stage piece, except for the close up at the end on the crowd. Whereas that tracking shot through the trenches is a modern shot.
mentioned this on Ben's show whenever we talked about Clockwork Orange. But one of the beauty that Kubrick does with shots like this is he creates a sense of symmetry. And symmetry usually creates a feeling of stability. But somehow, every single time he does something where there's that stability, it is something really like intense is building, and there isn't that sense of stableness that's going on. And once and here 15 years before Clockwork Orange, he's able to still he's able to like master this form of like taking the symmetry and making it feel uncomfortable.
Really, at the beginning of his career, which is insane.
Yeah. Because he's got a bunch of movies before this.
Well, he's got a couple. He started with The Killing, and that was only like a few years before this. And
That's
also
some good sound effects as well.
I think.
The sound design of this is crazy. But
yeah, really good sound effects. As far as like the walking, the Douglas character, walking and the explosions going on.
And the repeated the repeated explosions, both visually, whenever they're like having a conversation that seems like it's going to be a relatively stable conversation, and just an explosion goes off and completely disorients the conversation. That happens like at least a dozen times in the movie when they're in the trenches, especially like when because it's the class dynamics part of it is really interesting, because the top general never goes into the trenches, doesn't see the trenches, doesn't want to look at the court martial, doesn't want to he's there for the execution, but he's not even he's not a hands-on person. The bureaucracy is controlling a war that they're not even watching. Then of course you have the guy underneath him who's looking through binoculars, not actually putting his hands on the war. The one time he kind of walks through the trenches and kind of awkwardly just asks, "Hello, soldier, ready to kill more Germans?" Like it's not an authentic interaction. It's like, you know what I mean? He's inspecting everything. That's an insane scene when he's just having a fucking party and like literally the entire military is continually in these trenches, and he's literally just having a party with all these French aristocrats, which easily could double for American aristocrats. Like, you know what I mean? Like in his take, like in Kubrick's takedown of how the military in any really society works. He's literally just having a party, serving cognac to his guests, like, you know what I mean? Like just getting drunk while this war is taking place. And he's literally putting like thousands of soldiers' lives in the line.
But it's very much like a Donald Rumsfeld style character.
Yeah. But even, I mean, in some ways, the aristocratic elements of it is interesting, but the aspirational elements of the middle tier of lower officers is interesting. You don't see it with Dax, but look at what liquor even that lieutenant's drinking. He's not just drunk, and he's not drinking cognac, but he's also not drinking beer or wine, which would be lower class alcohols. Yeah. He's drinking like some kind of aperitif. It looks probably like some kind of Amaro or something. So like that's actually an aspirational class signal. Like he's and it's actually interesting because it's not something I think Americans would have caught, but the European audience would have.
Also when Meeker's about to die and he says, "Do you have a drink for me?" And the officer above him gives him like that. He has like that giant flask that he's like, "Take a sip of this." Like he's clearly like give it like it's not something that Meeker would necessarily have access to. I mean, not either, but like
that officer I thought was an enlisted officer as opposed to a commissioned officer. Yeah. So he has wine again, as opposed to some kind of like bougie low alcohol liquor.
Benedictines.
Yeah. It's one of those things that the enlisted officer has access to alcohol, but even then it's just a big basically a big thing of wine. There's a bunch of different class implications in all of that I think is very interesting.
Less European sophisticated watchers would be like, wow, he's drinking the good wine, but
right. Hey, just a little tidbit. NCO. It's a non-commissioned officer. It was just an E5. It's still enlisted. It's not an enlisted officer. But yeah, I'm here to educate everyone on how military ranks work.
That's why I brought you on to this.
Yeah, so I mean, we could talk about the poverty draft. We can talk about. Well, I do want to talk about how some of the scenes that I just saw Apocalypse Now. Again, I watch it probably once a year. I fucking love that movie. But I could see Coppola pulled some of those scenes. So when we were watching that trench, I was like really reminded of that scene on the beach after the cavalry landing when they're playing Wagner, Flight of the Valkyries, then land on the beach and the colonel is walking by with his shirt off and all this artillery flying and then sends someone out surfing and all these people are like ducking and he's just not even nothing, right? No reaction, just so used to it.
And similar to that, I think is Moreau deciding to shell his own you know what I mean, his own forces. And honestly, I think that's the most amazing because I did a cut on Twitter where I took the two scenes that I had the movie downloaded. And the first one is obviously him doing the super insincere, like, what is a promotion compared to the lives of one of my men? Like that whole grandstanding speech, which obviously is how the other general takes takes Kirk Douglas's like Dax's grandstanding, but obviously that's legitimate because he really does feel like this weird like this French liberty tradition where he wants to defend like the lives and the law of his men, like so. But that whole grandstanding speech where he's like, what is a promotion? What are honors? What are stars compared to the lives of my men? And then like, you know, because it's obviously like not that long a movie, like 15 minutes later, he's like, all right, shell the trenches.
My men come first of all, George. And those men know it too.
I know that they do.
You see, George, those men know that I would never let them down.
That goes without saying.
The life of one of those soldiers means more to me than all the stars and decorations and honors in France.
15 minutes later.
Order the 75s to commence firing on our own positions.
Captain, do you fail to comprehend the meaning of my order?
No, sir, but I respectfully ask the
Captain, do you fail to comprehend the meaning of my order?
No, sir.
Then carry it out, Captain.
It's interesting to me how much the French military probably does operate like the U.S. military, because I was actually trying to think about that when I was watching the movie. Because I was actually like, one of the things I was interesting in, there's so much social class status in the uniforms that we don't, this is one thing that is different. When Moreau goes into the trenches, he's wearing a capelet that is associated with like aristocracy. And I was like, in the U.S. military, does anybody get to wear a capelet even in 1914? I don't think so, actually. So like that was actually one of the things that reminded me, oh, this is about France. Like, but
I think it's starkly portraying the fact that his experience in war is unconnected, like completely disconnected from like the average soldier's experience in war. Like his experience in war is walking through, and they do tracking shots kind of in both of those scenarios. And his tracking shot with his lackey that later plays the prosecutor behind him is incredibly awkward.
Hello there, soldier. Ready to kill more Germans?
Yes, sir.
What's your name, soldier?
Sir, Private for all Company A.
Uh-huh. You married, Private?
No, sir.
Well, I'll bet your mother's proud of you.
Yes, sir.
You know, because he's just getting like smoke blown up his ass by everybody else around him. And the whole thing is like, hello, soldier, are you ready to kill some Germans? And then the soldier like has to answer, and he expects like a sunny answer. But at the end, the guy's like, wow, you really boosted the morale of these troops.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that he just denied that shell shock exists. Like it's completely disconnected from the lives of everybody on the ground. And I felt like his dress when he's walking through the trenches, like this experience where he's basically slumming it, it really emphasizes that.
Yeah. And we do, officers do have capelets in the U.S. military.
They do?
It's they have their special dress uniforms that they show off and wear in special occasions that look like that. They look like fucking 19th century Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't know. It's like how I knew that.
Guys, I don't know why we're talking bad about capelets. I think we should bring the capelets.
No, it's fine. But make everyone have capelets, right?
Let's
give everyone a capelet.
Everyone gets a capelet.
My politics aren't no capelets. My politics are
capelets.
Abolish class.
No capelets.
And make capelets much more accessible
to the masses.
Yeah, it's like it's wild though, because we would have our admirals or in some cases generals of certain theaters would come onto the ship or come in and talk to us because we had Marines on board as well. So like they would come on and we didn't have access. It was stand to the side. They were to talk to you. You don't talk back. You don't say anything back. The person who does say something back, like that guy was like, I'm shell shocked. He didn't say it, but he kept repeating the question kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where he's clearly something going on.
And I thought
that if that were to happen, you would be in trouble. Like you would absolutely be in trouble in the military if you did that to a fucking admiral or a general.
I thought that was played. I thought that was played really well in this specific movie because his shell shock is so clearly overwhelming to him. But like it's kind of, I don't want to say it's played satirically, but like it's played, I guess, humorously enough that you feel kind of disconnected from it.
Well,
like you don't feel. Like you feel like it's obviously horrific, but you're not like, I don't know, like it's played enough that you kind of feel distance to understand. You understand the two dynamics, which are this general not even wanting to admit that shell shock exists as a concept, despite the fact that it obviously fucking does when you're living for years in a trench, like in the ground, and constantly getting the shelling. And during the movie, you kind of almost. I'm not saying you get a taste of it, but like you kind of like every conversation in this movie when they're in the trenches is like disorientating. Like,
I think one thing I would say about this is that the Moreau being in the trenches itself, even in dress uniform, did feel to me as one of the breaches of the realism of the movie. Because I'm like, I don't think an officer of that high rank would have risked the trenches or even been allowed to, because if we lose such a high ranking officer, we're obviously down. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I've never heard of something like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember my history correctly, the beginning of the trench warfare, people would actually have like their rank and insignia and everything on their helmets too.
Yeah.
And so the snipers would be looking out for that, take them out, and they quickly stopped doing that. So it did happen, just maybe not this part of the war.
Well, it depends where you were in the trench networks. It's always important to remember there's like trench networks that are quite like deep, fortifications. So you could lurk around at the back of the trenches, and so long as nobody fired an artillery piece at you, you'd be fine.
Well, but the complicatedness of that though is they're specifically at an unwinnable part of the trenches, and they're on the front line trenches to do it. Like that's actually crucial to the movie about why they're taking the anthill.
And at the crux of the stalemate, that was like a real phase of the war, I guess. You know what I mean? Like,
I feel like it cinematically works, but it doesn't. I actually don't think it historically works, and I know that like I might be wrong about that. I'm willing to be. Like I'm not like I said. Like my interaction with the military is like, I have a brother-in-law who became a sergeant, and then I have. I've known people who are officers, and I also would like laugh at the fact that like we still give officers stuff like ceremonial swords and stuff, which is hilarious to me. But
we're an aspirant. We've never gotten out of the phase where we're an aspirant imperial power. Like,
it's not just the aspirant imperial powers. The military is where we don't hide the fact that this is modeled on feudalism. Like even from like the bourgeois Republican. Yeah. We're not even trying to hide it in the military. We don't hide it at all. Like, here's your ceremonial sword that's completely useless.
When you say that, oh, like it's interesting how similar, like, or universal these experiences are. Like, the reason I feel like is because during World War I and World War II, we kind of took our cues from the French and British military. Like, I don't think we've ever really gotten away from that. We've never really
I think military historians would disagree with you about that because a lot of our military culture was developed during the Civil War, but it was explicitly developed on feudal guidelines because they thought it had to be. I think what an interesting text that I've read for other reasons is actually James Burnham's second book, The Modern Machiavellians, only because of the end. And this is a conservative guy came up with a managerial thesis, but his image of what American management should look like is not college educated elites in the way we think about them. It's military officers. In fact, he thinks that like he basically thinks he projects the Eisenhower administration as the future of the United States in perpetuity, which is kind of hilariously wrong. But like that is who he thought the management was going to be, was middle management, generals and whatnot, and they were going to dominate U.S. society. Interestingly enough, I think one of the things that we can kind of see in the military versus the bourgeois is that despite both were totally dependent on imperialism and like, frankly, they're both the military's function in capital, frankly, is part of why they didn't do anything that Trump wanted them to do in the last year, to be honest. I don't think it has anything to do with like liberty or any horse shit like that. But
no, if they had done what Trump, it would have been incredibly destabilizing the Capitol.
Right. So, but it's interesting because the military structure, it's so semi-feudal that even the bourgeois kind of bristle under it, like because, like certain kinds of competition and stuff are tamped down on, etc. and so forth. But that's where it shows up in our society, I think, the most. And it is interesting because it is both an intensification of the class stratification that we already have, but it's also like this other older class stratification that we only allow to be obvious in this one case.
I guess when I was making the case that we kind of copy European imperial powers, it's less in how our military actually operates and more in kind of the theatrical and ceremonial aspects of it. I don't think we've ever gotten around being an aspiring imperialist power, because I think that we kind of see European tradition as something like to emulate.
But that's true. There's not one European tradition as well. Like military practices across the European continent are quite, are divergent. And of course, there's been an enormous amount of cross-pollination, like country like Japan based its land forces doctrines on imperial Germany, whereas they based naval doctrine and organization on the United Kingdom. But yeah, I mean, I think in the 19th century we have this kind of formation of what is conceptualized as like a modern military, and at various points in the 19th century different countries became the model for best practice, and particularly towards the late 19th century it was the Prussian model of military organization that became the kind of like gold standard of military military methodology and organization.
But this actually, again, to be historical, I mean, again, I don't mean to be the history pedant here, but maybe I will be.
I expected Djene to be the history pedant here.
Is
they
that
both the history pedant?
Yeah. Well, Djene's got a PhD in it. But
I have a PhD in Oriental studies. So
that's true. That's true. And
I'm an Orientalist,
and I'm not a military anything.
I don't think you can say that anymore. It's not PC.
But to make a point about France is in 1916 they had just started adopting that Prussian model. In the war, France had the worst casualties in World War I because they were still trying to run their like Napoleonic cavalry into trench and cannon fire as late as 1915. Like they would not drop their old structures of the military, and theirs was actually particularly anachronistic, but they held on to it because it had worked for 100 years. Like it almost took over all of Europe.
They got their asses kicked in 1871, though, because the Franco-Prussian War proved disastrous, where the sort of semi-literate, the French early to mid 19th century French sort of semi-literate peasant conscript army, which was like really good in like 1812, was just didn't function as well as the kind of like professionalized German system, in which basically in the German monarchy the Junker class were kind of integrated heavily into the officer corps, and and we see that model exported to a place like Imperial Japan, where samurais they're given a kind of new lease of life by being incorporated into the imperial military as well. So the French model was certainly not super effective in terms of there was a lot of push for military modernization,
but they resisted it until the middle of World War One. I mean, that's sort of the thing about why their casualties were even higher than the British is they would just send horses at modern tanks. I mean, it was kind of insane.
I mean, we just took hills and gave them up in Vietnam every week. Like this, we'd take a hill and we'd leave it, and the Viet Cong would come back in and take that hill again. It was like every single day. We just did the same shit France did 20 years earlier in Vietnam. So really, it's like, I don't know. I feel like there's no way to pinpoint what a single military does or does not do, or say where these things come from, because military is military, guns are guns, planes are planes, ships are ships. They kill. They're only there to kill. And then the draft, it's the people, it's the patriotism, it's the propaganda. I'm watching Tomorrow War right now. I'm still got like 45 minutes left. It's fucking awful. But I suggest you check it out for military propaganda. Yay. But yeah, it's like these things are happening every day in our country.
Once you do your stream on it, do you want to come back on and do a stream on that?
So we're going to do a stream probably this week because we've all seen it now. So we're going to talk about Tomorrow War's a Racket.
I'll watch it next week, and then
all modern all modern movies seem to be war propaganda.
I do want to like kind of tie that all in of just like, this is, the movie even talks about, the press and the people are turning against us, right? This is the same thing that happens every time, right? We support Iraq by 58% of the nation supported invading Iraq in 2003, and people forget that. Right, a majority of the nation, and yet now it's one of the most unpopular things we did. Vietnam, as was already been brought up, people supported Vietnam until 1968 in the Tet Offensive, when the ideas started going down and the pictures started coming out, the hearts and minds were being lost. And so this movie talks about it, and like these officers,
another movie I want to watch and do a stream on is the Hearts and Minds, like that.
Oh, that's a good one. The document, yeah, it's fucking good. My dad took me to see that in theaters too, but like this. I was born and raised in anti-war, but in poverty. So, there we go. Just kind of joined the Navy so I'd avoid combat. See how that worked out. But it's one of those things that when we talk about it, it's like these officers, these generals that get out are on your fucking TV on CNN, pushing liberal, neocon talking base, whether they're on Fox News or on CNN or in MSNBC. They're in their fucking uniforms or not, or there's a picture of them in an old uniform with all their stupid ass medals that they probably didn't fucking earn, and they got a lot of people killed for, or killed a lot of people, usually black and brown people, for those medals. These people are on the media every single day talking about things like China and Cuba and like the pullout of Afghanistan, how it's going to lead to Taliban. It was always going to fucking lead to Taliban. And guess what? We have CIA-backed Zero Squad still there. It's not like we're actually leaving. We're still backing independent private fighters in Afghanistan. It's not like we're actually leaving. We've never left. We've never left Africa. We've never left South America. All these countries that we're discussing, France, the United States, look at Belgium's imperialist history, Japan and China. They're all built on like fucking colonial white supremacy, nationalism, all of these things that are constant. Israel, the IDF, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. Like, we do that across the globe, and we're not different.
National supremacy is predicated in nationhood. I mean, this is, I'm going to say that like maybe the most controversial anarchisty thing I'm going to say, but any nation will probably replicate what we do if given the chance. And
which interestingly is a point that is made in Paths of Glory. I think,
right.
Yeah. Like to connect this a modern, I guess, understanding of this with this movie that came out in 1957. Like, that is something very much understood in the writing of this movie.
But it's also interesting. I mean, as socialists, like we should think about this a little bit, right? Because World War I is actually the crisis that splinters the socialist movement irreparably all over the world. It does it in the United States. It does it in Germany. It does it in the U.S. and what would become the USSR. Actually, like it's what causes the Bolshevik-Menshevik split to really matter. It's
what causes the Palmer raids here. Like,
right,
to have like, it gives them cover.
It also it is what forces the socialist movement to be liquidated into, at the time, the segregationist Democratic Party, because I mean, because of Debs taking a principled stance on war, not at all that he commanded literally 17% of the vote, which was almost as much as Wilson could command. It was not that far from it, and he was a third party candidate who could do so, and there's never been a third party candidate since then to have that much of the vote. But because he took an anti-war stance, he was imprisoned with a lot of other people. But and also, I mean, to be fair, a lot of right wingers, a lot of paleo conservatives who also opposed war, what we would now call paleo, because they didn't see themselves that way, were imprisoned in that time. It was actually a liquidation towards an establishment of a liberal center that happened at that moment, and the war was pretext to do it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Wilson fucking hated the fact that, number one, that, like, you know, I mean, the socialist movement existed, but even more than that, just like that opposition to his agenda existed. Like when Debs was in prison, like the sedition acts were invoked for the like exact purpose of making sure that like an anti-war like internationalist position, because obviously Woodrow Wilson had a pro-war internationalist position, couldn't formate in any way, shape, or form. It really, like, the principal stand of taking that anti-war position was something that really drove Wilson over the edge. And it's funny because, you know, he had William Jennings Bryan as his Secretary of State leading up to World War I, who obviously quit because he had a quote unquote like anti-imperialist position, and you know Wilson couldn't even find that tenable. So it's that moment in history really is when the U.S. left was decimated.
You're right, and the progressive movement was always not just in its Wilsonian form, but also in its Rooseveltian form, and its Teddy Rooseveltian form was always imperialist, and it led to weird coalitions historically during this time period, because like some neo-Confederates were backing leftists, what were the equivalent of leftists, against war expansion, particularly in the Philippines, which is where we cut a lot of the stuff that we would then use in World War I, 2. I gotta get my timeline right. When did the Philippine Wars before? Yeah,
1898.
Yeah.
So the Anti-Imperialist League was, included both left-wing and right-wing streams, because you had left-wingers who were against imperialism and right-wingers who were like, we don't want the potential of 1/5 of the U.S.'s population being Filipinos,
right.
No, there were incredibly. I just finished Stephen Kinzer's The True Flag. So like,
True Flag, yeah, that's a jump.
Yeah, no, I'm very much like in this mindset, because I was on like for the last like month and a half. I literally just listened to all of Kinzer's audiobooks. But no, very much there were like pro-segregationist Confederate anti-imperialists that just didn't want to deal with us having like the territoriality and like whatever was owed to like quote unquote like now third world countries, like
right.
But like also, you know, there's like leftists that have a very like we should not be imperialists because it's morally and, you know, just for our own sake, like it's wrong. So it's an interesting coalition, but at the same time, like the fact that it was a controversial position is also interesting considering where we are now.
Well, you'll meet right wingers now who are anti-war, right? You have the Ron Pauls or Rand Paul or those motherfuckers, the libertarians, right? And I say that because those aren't, as me as an anti-war activist, anti-war vet, someone who's been actually fighting the military-industrial complex since I left it in 2012. Or trying to, like people like Mike Preisner, you know, the most vocal people out there, the left flank, that's crew. I love them. Like, we don't look at libertarians as some sort of ally either, because they will be 100% anti-war, but 100% pro-Raytheon.
Yeah.
And pro-defense cutters who are driving the war because they don't make that connection.
That was the problem with like the New Left position, is that the New Left formed a coalition with libertarians against the Vietnam War, and it wasn't a sustainable anti-war position. It was kind of just like a general, oh, we shouldn't be in like this war, like, you know what I mean? Like
yeah. And Trump tapped into that in 2016, which if you talk to some, not all, but some right wingers, they were just like, yeah, I'm voting for Trump because he's going to get us out of the wars.
I don't know how many of you know my background, but like I got recruited into the right briefly through anti-war activism, through specifically that strain of anti-war activism, and to be honest, and not to be super sectarian, partly because a lot of the anti-war left at the time was embarrassing.
Yeah, no,
this
they
was
were not.
this was like 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
But you have to watch out because the nationalism they're selling is toxic, right? That's the reason why we have to be very careful with them, because they still would, like, if they saw something as a truly defensive war. There was this weird, we forget about them because they weren't the Ron Paul libertarians, they were the other kind, the weird Ed Randian libertarians. But like they justified their pro-war position, the Objectivist Institute at the time, and I guess now you're realizing how old I am. By the fact that they tried to paint Saddam as an aggressive force, and thus it was a just war on defensive grounds, and thus still okay by their libertarian nationalist framework, which the Ron Paulites and the Loraxites and such rejected, but they didn't reject it actually on like a fundamental moral ground. They rejected it on a factual claim, like. So it's something to kind of parse as we do, as I think we have seen with the Trump administration. I have heard, dyed in the rule GOP people say, and I've even seen Glenn Greenwald, who, God bless him, I love a lot of his international reporting, but like say somebody like J.D. Vance is an anti-imperialist.
God damn it. And so I'm gonna break this down real easy for anyone who might be listening who's like, not in school for this shit. But if your anti-capitalism does not have anti-imperialism, it is not anti-capitalism. If your anti-imperialism does not have anti-capitalism, it is not anti-imperialism. Period. Your anti-establishment is not our anti-establishment.
There was a really great interview with Evo Morales recently where he literally said that. He said he said Evo Morales, like Bolivia's former.
Oh, I know Evo Morales. I just didn't hear the interview.
There was this really amazing interview where he said if your anti-capitalism doesn't include anti-imperialism, like you're not truly of the left. Like,
well, I mean, and this is the other thing about the libertarians, depending on which variety of libertarian you're dealing with. The objection is to do with the extraction of money and not the warfare per se. They would be perfectly happy with privatized warfare being prosecuted around the world, right? And they're perfectly happy with the use of security forces, so long as those are private security forces. When you dig down into a lot of libertarian philosophy, it really just kind of it turns into a neo-feudalism where it's like, look, I want to do what I want. I want guns. I don't want to have to pay for this military. And if a company wants to protect its interests, it can protect its interests. But why should I pay for that? So it's often a very. I mean, of course, there are libertarians who are delusionally anti-war and believe that they can somehow square the circle of being economic libertarians and sort of anti-imperialists. But I think a lot of the time this philosophy is a kind of, we're talking two different languages and we mean different things even when we say the same word. Like when they talk about elites, they don't mean the same elites as people on the left are. We have that same vocabulary, and I think some of the less informed people out there often confuse the fact that we use similar vocabulary for some kind of convergence of ideological position, when in fact sometimes it's just accident that we're using the same vocabulary, and sometimes it's in a deliberate effort to confuse the terms of debate. So when libertarians are talking about anti-imperialism, they're talking about a different phenomenon from what we're talking about when we talk about anti-imperialism, because we don't see imperialism as purely being exercised through the military realm. It's exercised through economic and diplomatic and political and even cultural mechanisms and vehicles. So, and when they're talking about it, they just don't want the U.S. military being deployed in such a ham-handed way around the world. And a lot of the time, and this is true of liberals as well, their problem is one of imperial management and mismanagement rather than any kind of principled stance against the American empire per se.
To turn the hate against libertarians is back to the movie, but also a point that this movie hits on about its slight cynicism towards the working class, which it is definitely sympathetic to. I want to say like Kubrick's sympathies and Kirk Douglas's sympathies are mostly with working class, and I guess with some lower management that they probably shouldn't have some sympathies with. That's also my problem with David Simon.
I'll push back against this. I don't think it's towards middle management. I think because you see middle management being cowards in this movie just as much as you see the generals. You know what I mean? Like what I think Kubrick's sympathies are with this French revolutionary liberty idealism. So
I want to talk about Kubrick's hypercynicism for a minute though, and why World War I is a good locus for it. Because one of the reasons why World War I destroys the left is that the working class itself does not do what we thought it was going to do. No, what socialists thought were going to happen, I mean, basically, was that the workers would not tolerate the kind of treatment they were going to get in the military once they were conscripted into it, and they wouldn't fight. Yeah. And what we learned is that it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's not that the people there are shown as wanting to fight. It doesn't, like, the power of the state and the initial power of nationalism in the beginning, but it doesn't maintain, is so great that we were wrong about what the working class's response was going to be. And that led to a lot of cynicism. And like Kubrick's cynicism actually does come back to the cynicism this time though, because like the left really thought the working class was going to fight this more than it did. But to be fair to the working class of the South, I think also no one realized how much weaponry and power the modern state really had until World War I. What I was thinking about why Kubrick is so cynical, though, is whenever he sees people try to aspirationally operate within this, regardless of their class, they have to take on the worst aspects of the class above them. And it's interesting. Like I always tell people, if you want to understand Kubrick and his anti-war sentiment, you don't want to watch Full Metal Jacket, because the second half of the Full Metal Jacket actually muddles some of the message. For the reason talked about, it's because it's anti-war, it ends up accidentally glorifying war without meaning to. Watch Barry Lyndon, where you see someone really rise out of the peasant class into the aristocracy and become, to use an advisor term, a human shit stain. By doing so, you realize that, like, by trying to engage with that class at all, if you engage with it, you become more like it. But also that a lot of the common people were not in the place to really fight back. They would just get mowed down, and people didn't really realize that until World War I. So what were your options? You could either try to engage with it, or you cannot. And like Lorax said, like one of the things about Dax is kind of a little bit of a cop-out, because he kind of has it both ways at the end. Like he doesn't leave. He doesn't pay a price for not leaving either.
I kind of want to counterpoint this, because I think all right, so I'm not going to argue this in real life, but like in cinematic, like the cinematic version of it, at least the fact that it seems like without Dax being there, there's no buffer between countless lives being lost and like the French bureaucracy, at least in this case, kind of makes it so that Dax is kind of left with an impossible task, because like it's pretty clear that if he just leaves, 50% of his men are going to get killed regardless. And I think that 50% of his men do get killed, and the fact he's a failure for that reason. I don't think Dax is a winning character. Like he's clearly a character that's failed to challenge the bureaucracy. But I think it's pretty clear that, you know, Maru he's kind of knows that Dax's weakness is that he actually does have empathy for the men in the trenches.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I often think about that trap, right? That we can think of it as a reformist trap. I mean, I'm a teacher. I deal with it all the time, like in my job. Like when I'm like, how much is my ability to like protect my kids actually predicated in the system in which I am operating in, and actually by trying to protect them, further maintaining the problem? Because I can only do it for so long and in such a context, and what's going to happen usually happens anyway.
But all right, so the end goal though for that is that 50% of your kids are not killed by machine guns. You know what I mean?
That's true.
So
But
what I'm saying in defending Dax's idealism is that by like if he walked away and a bureaucrat who literally did only want to a bureaucrat who literally only wanted to move up in that system replaced him, there'd be no concern at all for human life. Like, can you imagine because that same court martial would have taken place either way, with or without Dax. So let's say he had walked away, and a second version of the incredibly like groveling asinine like prosecutor character that was like just, you know what I mean, like just murdered like second in command. Like if that character had been like put in Dax's position, or if somebody like that just wanted to move up the career ladder, it would have like
they would have shot like 30 as opposed to 4 actually. Yeah. I mean
a better ending would have just him taking the men, Dax taking the men and Gurrent going to burn down the fucking mansion that the generals are in, right? Like that would have been a cool ending of saying, hey, now we're going to do mutiny. Like, because fuck this war. Fuck this war. I know that's not how it happened, but I'm not going to sit here and be like, the movie's not accurate to what happened anyways, because it was 4 and, it was all corporals. It wasn't 2 privates, so fuck the accuracy. Make it if you're going to do anti-war now, it's 2021. It's 58 different 57, sorry. Different story, different this film was banned, I think, in Germany and Switzerland for like 2 decades or something.
It was banned in France too, I think.
Yeah, in France, yeah. So like it did its job for its time, but like now if I were to remake it, I would have done a mutiny and like taken all the men and shown what solidarity collectivism looks like against the bourgeoisie of the generals, right? I think that PMC, that petty bourgeoisie fighting with the proletariat, which is the front line, right? Opposed to siding with the true bourgeoisie of the generals. And I think that's where could have been better, didn't. Of course, now he's crossed and he's stuck in the system, and it shows the system and how war is a problem, but you're still there. Right, you're still fighting. Your men are still going to die whether you leave or not.
I think that's a failure of Kubrick's entire anti-war, I guess. Maybe not a failure, but I think a problem with his entire anti-war library, I guess, because like there's a bunch of films he makes about it, is he never really provides an alternative to.
There is no out.
Yeah.
I mean that's the thing. That's the thing with all of the. Particularly the more they're actually about war. I mean, I think this is an interesting point David Simon did make, is that this movie is about the bureaucracy of war more than it's about the war itself. And
it can replicate in any institution, really. Like, yeah.
I also think it's interesting that, I mean, to talk about capitalism being shitty a little bit, that this movie is part of the era of Kubrick's work that was remembered by snobby critics like myself, but not remembered by the general public because of rights issues. Because it's a United Artists film, it was never included in the Kubrick box sets that were readily available in the 90s. That's also true for The Killing. That's also true for even Spartacus, which people do tend to know about. And so like everyone thinks that like Kubrick's work really begins with like Lolita because of just an arbitrary thing of like capital rights stuff. I mean, that's why this movie was not widely distributed for a long time.
By the way, can I just say The Killing, just objectively like a good, interesting movie. Like I remember watching it, and I took a noir film class when I was in, which but it was a state college, so I'm not gonna, like, it makes it less snobby if I say that. But I just still remember like the scenes where they're about to rob the racetrack, or like just some of the most memorable and like compelling like scenes of the era. Like it's just like good. I thoroughly.
I was also educated at a state college. It's okay. I still ended up. I still have to fight my own aspirational snobbiness, which I think actually, as a side note, but to get a little bit into like the way class politics works, if you're a working class person trying to work your way up, that is a temptation that I think is very real, is to overcompensate with snobbiness so that you acculturate yourself to people like Moreau, like that ass kisser. I mean, there's a reason why those ass kissers exist, and a lot of those people do come from the same social class as we do. Like, and yeah, they're traitors, but the reason why it's just, you don't, it's a big ask to ask people to be proud of their working class origins when every signal you have in your life is against that, in a subtle way.
And more fully, I mean, which is why this movie is so prescient, like more fully in the last 40 years, like since kind of the Carter Reagan era of like, like meritocratic neoliberalism, like much like, quote, not really, but you know what I mean? Like that obsession with like that obsession with job title, with credential, like the neoliberal age is an age that very much like pushes us to like, I don't know, the neoliberal age like pushes us to like want to aspire past our class. Class is no longer taken as something that you can build solidarity in, obviously, because those solidaristic institutions have been decimated. Like now it's something you aspire past. So the fact that that's the case, like, makes this movie incredibly prescient, because the one character, obviously, and I don't think this necessarily would have been the case if Kirk Douglas wasn't producing it, but in this movie, the one character that you know is literally a class traitor is Dax. Like he's a famous Parisian lawyer who decides, I care about human life enough to defend these men. I'm a defense lawyer. Like, so it's interesting for that reason, but I don't think that necessarily, I don't think if this movie was made today, they would have cared that much about that character. Like, it's part of like a social conscious New Deal era liberal filmmaking.
Yeah, I think
against, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that like Kubrick's personal politics. It's an observation Marx makes about conservative artists that they tend to be more honest about class relations than progressive ones do. He always Marx liked Steinhall for the same reason, because he was just like, well, the progressives just kind of like don't portray things as they are at all, and so people can't respond to the reality of the situation. And I think this movie does slightly suffer from that tension between Kirk Douglas's liberalism and Kubrick's just. Frankly, I don't even think it's political. I think Kubrick's kind of a misanthrope, frankly. Like,
yeah. No, yeah, definitely. Because I never get that feeling, even from like Eyes Wide Shut. Like the feeling that I get from those, like from any of Kubrick's films, isn't like, oh, man is great, and that's why I'm opposing authoritarian structures. It's authoritarian structures are the inevitable result because people are fucking terrible. And you see that in Kirk Douglas's speech, where he stands up and he's like, "This is one of the times that I'm ashamed to be a human being." That's how Kubrick, I think, on a daily basis felt.
Yeah, it's not just he's ashamed to be of his class; he's ashamed to be a person.
Like, yeah, and that's why that's why that was written into this movie, because I think Kubrick is kind of like the idealism of cynicism, like the fact that you're like, oh, I can see what human beings can and I think should be, and nobody lives up to that, no matter who you are.
Kubrick is the cat with the salad. And we are the women pointing at it.
Yeah.
Because like that last scene, and I guess, I mean, I wanted to go 2 hours, so I guess we could close out talking about this last scene. Because so the last scene is kind of hailed overall as like a portrayal of humanism. Like the fact that they start singing along with Kubrick's future wife is like almost seen as like an act of humanism. Like, oh, like, look, this is showing that like the men are people, but at the same time they're jeering her, catcall, like the amount of like you know what I mean, she's literally like a prisoner of war shown in front of these people who end up like feeling sympathetic towards the song, I guess, or moved by it, but it's not really an ode to sentimentality or emotionality or anything.
Yeah, I mean, the implied threat of that scene, and I mean, like, for example, it's a 58 movie. There's a strong implication of possible sexual violence behind that scene, and it is definitely being coded in that, and the way she is being forced up there, and the way she's being talked about. But it's that. I mean, to use lame-ass Marxiological terminology, it is a dialectical scene in that both conditions, both sympathy with her and the cruelty of what they're doing to her are presented at the same time as both being real. And that is something that Kubrick cynicism allows him to do that a lot of other filmmakers won't go there. They won't live in that moment in the same way. Even though I think, frankly, I love Kubrick films. He's one of my top 3 filmmakers, but he hates people too much for me. Like he really does. Like,
no, I listen. I agree. I think that really in the movie, that's really the one moment of emotionality that isn't, Kirk Douglas just absolutely coming all over like French law. Like that's really. So I think it's interesting, but at the same time, it's also just it's war fatigue. Like it's not empathy with her.
It was humanizing the troops, like the French soldiers, and I am not even in the synopsis of it. Like afterwards, it's kind of says that it says like, oh, this is humanizing moment of the troops, but really, it's a very gross thing. We're parading a prisoner of war, a German civilian, in front of a bunch of rabid male troops who have been there for a long time. And then this is right after that guy's talking about, I haven't thought about sex because I'm about to die, right? Telling the priest this shit. And it's like
Ralph Meeker, though, I gotta say, it's an amazing portrayal of
like that scene was Apocalypse Now had that scene too, a very similar scene in where they were parading around like the USO, but they were American women who but still that a very awful scene about sexual assault and shit like that. And it's like these kind of things, the way Apocalypse Now portrayed it more than I liked it in.
No, they
didn't humanize, right? This was humanizing.
Animalistic.
Yeah, they were animalistic.
They were animalistic in Apocalypse Now, which I honestly, until this year, I hadn't watched Apocalypse Now, and then I watched it 3 times to do a stream with Micah from Jacobin and Ben, which was we had like. It was great doing that, but that was like one of the first 2 movie streams I did, I think. But Apocalypse Now, it's like they are animalistic to the point where you start to like they the women get ferried away obviously in the helicopter, and you have to realize like these are no longer people. These are these are literally like animals at this point. And in this movie, I think that it's a little bit too sentimental. Like there's a little bit too much sentimentality, the fact that they start crying and singing along when you know that the actual threat is the sexual violence. Like,
well, it's 1950. It's the 1950s. There's only so far they could go with that metaphor. But I think, as Varn says, for a movie, 57, 58, that is like that's like a strong implication of sexual violence, as strong as you can get in a mainstream movie.
Yeah.
And the fact that they do the kind of like they all cry at the end is, I would suspect, I don't know, is like a way to avoid the censorship, right?
Yeah.
If you ended up with them all just still going wild and then cutting out, like the implication of sexual violence, even though not shown on screen, would have been too much, right?
They're also like kind of crying for themselves. They're not crying for her. Like their display of emotionality is that they're war fatigued. It's not.
Don't get me wrong, though. Didn't Kubrick actually push against this scene, and it was more Kirk Douglas pushing the scene, right? I think.
Yep, it was. You know what? It's interesting though. I was thinking when I was watching this movie is like how much. One, I was thinking also like Kirk Douglas, like totally in some ways is the embodiment of this horseshit. I mean, he's the kind of dude who, to belong in Hollywood, probably because he had to, hid his own origins. I mean, like his name, like he anglicized his name, hid all of his Polish ancestry. What the other thing I was thinking about it is that motherfucker's old, because he's
dead.
I don't. But he only died last year.
Yeah, no,
like,
he lived to 101, dude. That's insane.
Who lives to be 101 these days? Huh?
Kirk Douglas.
Kirk Douglas.
Other than Kirk
a
Douglas.
movie star.
No, other than Kirk Douglas, who lives to be 101?
But like they're doing like retrospectives of him, and the fact that he already looks grotesque in his 50s and like 40, like. He looks.
Yeah, he's 40 in this movie in 1958, and I'm like, holy shit, that dude's a vampire. Like,
who would want to live to 101? Honestly, shit, past 60, I don't even know how much I would enjoy this.
I think it's really like 60. You've got like your health. You can move around. You got a bit of Viagra just in case you need it. You're fine, right?
Yeah, no,
as long as you're in good health. I mean, that's the main thing.
We've hit the 2-hour mark. I feel like people don't watch after that, so I'm just gonna throw it to each person. Just final closing thoughts on this movie.
I love this movie. I think it is probably like one of the most effective anti-war movies until you get to the movies of the 70s. That said, it is because of the nature of anti-war movies. I actually do kind of agree. It's almost impossible to do it in film. It's easy. I do think there are like real anti-war novels.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, comic books even. But there's something about the glamour of the screen that people almost always take the wrong lesson. And not just actually like anti-capitalist movies are the same way, like Wolf of Wall Street, like everybody learns, and Wall Street, same director even. They learn the wrong lessons from the movie, and that's always a threat with this one, particularly with the Hays Code stuff. But I actually think of Kubrick's anti-war movies, it's probably the most effective. Even more than Full Metal Jacket, because it's.
I think that it could have gone a different direction. Like I think that if Vietnam and our myths around it have turned out a different way, that Full Metal Jacket could have probably been more effective. But the fact that kind of we took our defeat and somehow like in the mythos of American society turned it into a victory for us, kind of makes Full Metal Jacket moot at that point. You know, like.
Yeah, I see
Although
that.
Full Metal Jacket's not a bad Kubrick movie. We're just gonna
it's a great movie.
It's excellent, and even a bad Kubrick movie is like better than everybody else's movie. But like,
but there was like it's been chronicled, like sold, like people who enlisted in the Iraq War, people who enlisted in Afghanistan took Full Metal Jacket and said like this is a movie that I resonate with, which on some level, like Ben says this all the time, like people like seeing themselves replicated in film. But like on another level, it kind of just like we saw in that clip earlier, like the military bureaucracy is able to just take it and continue on as if because there's no cure, I guess, for it.
There's no cure for ending war.
Lorax, you got some final closing thoughts?
Down with the military and industrial complex. No, it was great. I mean, it was great. It's a great film. Like I'm surprised I hadn't seen it prior to this, and I watched it this morning. I'm not gonna lie, had a rough week. But yeah, it's fucking good, and I have my gripes with it, but mainly it's because it's 1957, which Gene brings up really good points of like, why it was the way it was, and I get that, but. It sucks that we as a society don't learn anything from it. It came out in 1958 and not a goddamn thing has changed. It was right after Korea. We still ended up in Vietnam, like literally 5 years later.
It's kind of
when we started doing Operation 63, I think, were the first operation, like ground operations in Vietnam. And then you have, that going on until 74. 80s come around. We have a Cold War and really the Contras in the 80s. And it just doesn't end, right? And then Iraq, Afghanistan. And what Kubrick said in this film was very important for people to understand and take in and analyze like we're doing right now. But I just wish things could change. I wish people would understand how powerful this movie was. And, I saw that clip when we were watching Simon. Generation Kills, another one. I totally forgot to mention that. And I haven't seen that one yet. But that's going to be one of the ones that I want to watch coming up.
When you think of Kubrick, like you don't think of this movie. Like I've never until the last few days. I know it existed, but like I hadn't seen it, and I'm a huge fucking fan, like of his later filmmaking. So it's like I like Doctor Strangelove is a movie I've been watching since I think I was 10 when I bought it. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey. My dad just reminded me I watched it with him on the couch when I was like 6 years old, like which I should not have done, but same. So even someone like me that like has an understanding of this director, like this is a movie that's been buried, like.
Yeah,
I think.
Well, I wouldn't come on here without plugging Left Flank Vets, right? I'm just one person out of the four of us, and all four of us have different things to add. We all come from very different places in the U.S. and different backgrounds, different services, and different ideologies. Like some of us joined because we're poor, others joined because of military families. We talked about from that Midwest area, right? Who parents were in the military. There are a lot of like, we can talk about the poverty draft another time, but War is a Racket, Smedley Butler is always a go-to read. And then check us out. Check out Left Flank Vets. You know, we tend to speak more on issues first because, you know, there's no stop putting vets on a pedestal. We don't fucking deserve it. And like, yeah, it's like our universal healthcare should be everyone's universal healthcare. It shouldn't just be for us. Or
Yeah,
my UBI, all that shit. Like free college, VA home loan. You all deserve it too.
I can't remember who said it, but like at one point someone said Medicare for all is not the goal. Like it's VA for all. Like really is the, you know what I mean? Like the
national healthcare system.
Yeah,
we have it already. We have the infrastructure. Yeah. Like if all these hospitals around us were to be taken over by the VA, we'd have a nationalized healthcare system. Like, no more CEOs of healthcare insurance. Like, but I digress. Great film, Paths of Glory. Fucking see it, and then check out Left Flank Vets and follow everyone on the screen today because y'all are pretty badass. So
we're gonna have you on a lot more. Like don't worry. Like you'll have a lot of other chances to. You know, I mean, if you want them to plug everything too. Ian, final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic movie. It was a movie I hadn't seen before. You know, everybody else has said like pretty much what I would agree with on this topic. It's very difficult to make a war movie from the perspective of a soldier that does not inadvertently glorify war. I think the only anti-war movies that you can make are ones that show the civilian cost from the civilian perspective and on what that looks like. So even if you try to make an anti-war movie, it can be it can be kind of appropriated for those reasons. Just like, you know, all those drill sergeants in the United States military use a script from Full Metal Jacket, even though that was not the intention of the movie. I would also agree with Lorax about, you know, I am very ambivalent on the ability of art to do anything other than reflect society. I did, you know, this very powerful anti-war movie did not seem to make a dent in the American public consciousness. And as you said, Forrest, it has been swept away in the popular mentality. And even the anti-war movies we do think of, I remember, you know, seeing Full Metal Jacket as a teen, Platoon, and going like, "Whoa, this stuff is like badass. Look at these badasses kicking asses." You know, so I think that this is a really important thing. But for a movie made in '57, I think that's as good as it's going to get. And I would call this like a movie to watch on a rainy Sunday afternoon because, you know, it has that quality cinematography. It has that
amazing, dazzling cinematography, considering that it's like
strong dialogue. And for a movie made back then, it is still like highly watchable and enjoyable. And it's not long. So, you know, I would put it in the category of movies like was a sort of a type of movie from about like the mid 50s to the late 70s, which are good for like Sunday or Saturday afternoons when you don't have everything on and you can sit down and enjoy it. Other than that, I want to plug This Is Revolution. We'll be back on Tuesday. I'm not going to be there on Tuesday, but we'll be there on Tuesday talking with Professor John Graham about Native American stuff. Then on Thursday, we'll be doing Foreign Policy Thursday. Then on Saturday, I don't know what's going on Saturday, but Marcus from Left Flank Vets will be there on Saturday.
Yeah, I was about to say Marcus and Jason, and we all have this interconnected podcast stream, extended family, I guess. This
extended podcast universe.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And Gene.
Jason was nice enough to lend me like 2 hours of his time on Wednesday to go over. We watched Sorry to Bother You and Blind Spotting and did like an amazing stream on that with Conan Neutron. Like, it just, you know, the amount of time he's willing to give up, even when he has like a million things going on, is incredible.
No, I was just gonna say it was really a great film to watch. I don't have a whole lot to add other than the fact that, you know, I feel like to make the second Buckaroo Banzai reference with David Simon making the first, y'all are going to become our anti-war blue coat regulars while we're the Hong Kong Cavaliers up top here. So, but yeah, no, thank you guys. This is really absolutely, you know, a banger film to watch, and it's so great to see Baby Kubrick just nailing it.
And Ralph Meeker.
Wow, Ralph Meeker.
Shout out to Ralph Meeker because he started off this whole podcast. If it wasn't for Ralph Meeker being our guest in the first episode,
Yeah, I can't wait to just go through his entire filmography on the show.
You know what? I'm scrapping Movie Night Extra. It's now just the Ralph Meeker podcast.
Please don't.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's been fun, and also Andrew, where's my commissioned artwork?
It's yeah. Working on it.
What Lorax says about the movie, it was a real good movie, and having only been familiar with Kubrick via Full Metal Jacket, this is like the second movie that I've seen of his, and I actually do echo what Lorax says about us kind of being in this never-ending culture of being in war, starting with at least World War II or World War I, and now into Afghanistan. It's and Iraq. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, is what I could say. And actually, this is kind of fitting, though, given that it is 20 years. It will be 20 years in October since we've been in Iraq. I mean, obviously, we're not leaving. We'll still be there.
Yeah, Iraq can vote. Afghanistan's about to be able to drink here in a couple of years. And like, you know, Obama stood up AFRICOM, you know, and rebombing of Somalia after the thing is, like, it doesn't end. You know, with the Paths of Glory, it shows that, like, I wish more people could be exposed to this. What would it do? What did Sorry to Bother You do? But I think what Djene said about art is, like, it does reflect where society's at, and, like, that's all. When will it change? I do believe art can bring people together for sure, and I think movies can do that. But it really is in, like, the way we talk about it and analyzing it is good. But, you know, where else? Like, what else with the anti-war movement? What else can we do? You know?
I guess my one final thought, to give myself this space, is that, you know, when you guys were talking about the left, like, new left libertarian coalition that opposes war, the thing is that like the libertarian view of it is obviously that, like, the fact that our human casualties are so big that we need to now have mercenaries do that for us. Like, capital gets replicated. So I guess I just wanted to add that into this last little bit of conversation, is that, you know, even, you know, when it comes to, like, libertarian, maybe not the Ron Paul, well, probably still the Ron Paul version, but especially, like, the Ayn Rand version, is, like, you know, capital gets replicated in the sense of, like, maybe American lives don't get lost as much, but, you know, nobody else's lives matter in that, like, scenario. So, all right, so I'm gonna sign off this because we've hit the mark, but this is a good conversation.